Hello friends, today I'm going over 7 real wildlife encounters. 7 idiotic people who were attacked by animals while on a safari trip. From a river guide who steered his tourists into waters known for massive Nile crocodiles, to a man who decided the side of a safari canoe between him and a massive crocodile was more inconvenience than protection. Welcome, this is Animal Encounters. But first, we start in the Limpopo bush, where a tourist with a camera and a 2-trip track record stepped off the vehicle and directly into the first story. It was March 6th, 2015, and the dry season had stripped the Limpopo Reserve to red clay and bare mopane open ground, long sightlines, and the kind of visibility across the scrubland that makes the bush feel more controlled than it is. The game tracks cut straight through flat terrain, and animals resting in the mid-morning heat were observable at distance, giving the drive a quality that felt almost manageable. Garet Moussaoui, 38, was a project manager from Rotterdam on his 3rd safari visit to the same private reserve in Limpopo province, South Africa. His previous 2 trips had been without incident, close sightings, good photographs, easy drives. Those 2 visits had, without Garet appearing to notice, quietly transformed how he read the environment. On his first trip, the guide's authority over distance and positioning had been something he deferred to without question. By his 3rd, it had become something he negotiated around. That morning, he arrived with upgraded camera gear and requested closer wildlife shots. The experienced guide, driving the reserve's open-sided vehicle, agreed to help. For the first 2 hours, the pattern held. Every time the guide stopped at a sightline appropriate distance, Garet repositioned himself along the vehicle's side rail, extending his camera arm further past the body of the vehicle, shifting his center of gravity toward the open air. He had been corrected twice. Each correction had less impact than the one before. The guide noticed this escalation as they stopped near a resting male lion about 65 feet from the track, still and clearly visible in open terrain. These were exactly the conditions that Garet's 2-trip track record had trained him to mistake for a margin of safety. That margin did not exist. What I keep thinking about is the guide sitting there watching it happen in real time. He'd already warned him, maybe more than once, but each warning seemed to matter a little less than the last. At some point, you're watching someone move closer and closer to danger, knowing they no longer believe the rules apply to them. African lions can cover 30 feet in under 2 seconds during a charge. Adult males weigh 330 to 420 pounds, and their attacks are built to bring down prey far larger than a human. The warning signs are brief, often less than a second. In open terrain, distance is the one factor that consistently matters. By the time Garet stepped 12 to 15 feet away from the vehicle, that advantage was already gone. The lion charged without pause. Based on the scene reconstruction, Garet had not managed to turn fully before contact was made. He sustained severe injuries to his upper body and neck. The guide, without a safe means to intervene, radioed for emergency support immediately. Response reached the location approximately 40 minutes later. Garet was unresponsive when assistance arrived and was pronounced dead shortly after. The inquiry that followed confirmed he had exited the vehicle without authorization. The reserve cooperated fully with investigators. No action was taken against the guide, who had followed protocol at every stage. The lion was not disturbed. 2 uneventful trips is a specific kind of dangerous. It doesn't teach you how safe the bush is, it teaches you that your read of the situation is correct, when the only thing that was actually correct was the luck. By trip 3, the guide's corrections weren't landing the same way because Garet had 2 data points telling him nothing bad happens here. The lion had 0 data points telling it the same thing. While the Limpopo dust had settled over what investigators would reconstruct from boot prints and scattered equipment, the waterways of western Uganda were about to show how quickly a guide's confidence in his own track record can become the exact thing that ends it. It was August 19, 2020, and the Kazinga Channel in western Uganda, connecting 2 lakes through one of the most wildlife-dense corridors in the region, ran shallow and still along its morning bends. Its banks in the dry season attract large numbers of Nile crocodiles that spend hours motionless along the shoreline and in the channel's quieter sections. The water through much of the channel moves slowly enough that a large crocodile resting just beneath the surface can leave almost no visible sign from above. Licensed operators know where crocodiles gather, when they are most active, and which areas demand caution. That knowledge is not instinct, it comes from formal training, licensing, and years of experience working within a system designed around those risks. risks. It is exactly what Okwir Sabamala, 41, had decided he did not need. Okwir had worked briefly as a deck assistant on an authorized vessel before parting ways and setting up independently. He ran a small, motorized wooden boat, marketed through guest houses in the nearest town, and had built his client base around one central selling point: closer access to the channel's wildlife than the licensed operators would provide. He charged less, ignored official routes, and after nearly 2 incident-free years, presented his record as proof of expertise. Passengers who had booked through him in prior months and who were interviewed after the incident described a guide who navigated the channel's edge closer than anything they had seen on other tours, who passed through sections that authorized operators consistently avoided, and who answered any client hesitation with practiced reassurance. He had been there dozens of times. Nothing had gone wrong. That absence of consequence was, to Okwir, the same thing as evidence of safety. It was not. The tourists saw only a confident guide offering closer views than licensed tours. They had no way to recognize the hidden dangers. On the morning of August 19th, he was running 2 paying tourists through a bend in the channel, a section that experienced guides flagged as high risk because large Nile crocodiles were frequently observed there. The water along the bend ran shallow near the shoreline, while submerged vegetation and muddy banks created ideal ambush habitat. From the surface, it showed no animal activity at all. Nile crocodiles are considered some of Africa's most dangerous predators. Large adults can grow over 15 feet long and weigh more than 1,000 pounds. They hunt by remaining still beneath the water, often invisible in muddy or murky conditions. A crocodile can be only a few feet away without being seen. That is why experienced guides treat entering the water as the most serious risk. Once someone is in the water, the crocodile already has the advantage. As the boat moved through the bend, it struck a submerged obstruction hidden beneath the surface. The impact destabilized the vessel and caused it to capsize. All 3 occupants entered the water. One tourist reached a bank section and was recovered with minor injuries. The second tourist managed to hold onto the overturned hull. Okwir entered the water several yards from the boat. According to survivor accounts and the subsequent investigation, a large Nile crocodile was observed near his position moments after the capsize. He disappeared beneath the surface and did not resurface. His body was recovered from the channel later that afternoon. Cause of death was determined as drowning associated with injuries sustained during the crocodile attack. Post-incident review confirmed that Okwir had been operating without authorization, that no required safety equipment was present on the boat, and that local park staff had previously identified him as an unlicensed operator without issuing a formal removal from the channel. What I keep coming back to is that proximity was his product. He sold access to dangerous waters, and years without incidents made the risk seem normal. While the Kazinga Channel had closed over Okwir in broad daylight with passengers feet away and no way to intervene, the flooded waterways of Botswana's Okavango Delta were about to show what happens when a photographer's certainty in his own judgment carries him past his guide's final instruction into terrain where no warning would come a second time. It was February 11, 2014, and the Okavango Delta in Botswana's northwest had reached the height of its annual flood pulse, a seasonal inundation that spreads across millions of acres of flatland, transforming the terrain into a shallow, papyrus-lined waterscape that looks from the low hull of a mokoro, almost impossibly tranquil. The water moves slowly. The reed beds and calm water create an illusion of safety, but crocodiles move with the floodwaters and often remain completely unseen. In February, during peak inundation, large adults are distributed through sections of channel that the animals cannot access in dry months, and the murky, vegetation-heavy margins that look empty from a mokoro hull may conceal animals positioned within feet of the surface. Braden Quirk, 35, was a freelance nature photographer from Queensland with a growing online audience built around rare and difficult wildlife documentation. He had joined a licensed mokoro safari operating out of a delta camp in the Moremi Game Reserve, a multi-day guided experience that moved through the papyrus channels on traditional dugout canoes pulled by experienced local guides. Braden had come specifically for crocodile imagery. The slow water and channel margins created conditions he believed would allow ground-level documentation he could not achieve from a vehicle or a camp platform. Before the excursion began, the guide, who had spent 11 years navigating those channels, gave strict safety instructions. No one was to leave the Mokoro, extend equipment over the water, or approach the banks. The reason was specific. Large Nile crocodiles had been confirmed in that area. These were not precautionary rules, they were responses to a known danger. For the first day and a half, the pattern held. Braden photographed from the Mokoro's hull, repositioning for angles within the vessel's footprint. On the morning of the 11th, during a section where the channel widened into a shallow reed-fringed bay, the group stopped at a sightline that Braden found insufficient for the low-angle shot he was after. He told his guide he wanted to set up on the bank for a ground-level frame. His guide declined clearly, specifically, and with a reference to the crocodile activity the authorities had documented in that section as recently as the previous week. Braden acknowledged the instruction, appeared to accept it, and waited until his guide had pulled the second Mokoro toward the opposite channel edge. He then stepped out of his vessel into ankle-deep water at the channel margin and moved approximately 20 feet toward a low mud bank, carrying his camera and tripod. He knew exactly what shot he wanted. The image was real, the risk felt distant. The same calculation appears throughout every story here. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most dangerous predators, responsible for hundreds of fatal attacks annually across the continent. Large adults reach 15 feet in length and exceed 1,000 pounds. Their hunting method requires nothing more than patience and position. A large animal motionless in 18 inches of murky water at a reed margin is invisible from 3 feet away. In flood season, with vegetation dense and water opaque with sediment, the warning that precedes a strike is not behavioral. There is no visible approach. The animal is already there. The guide heard the disturbance and turned his Mokoro immediately. Braden's tripod was deployed at the mud bank's edge. Physical evidence recovered by Botswana wildlife investigators' boot prints, equipment scatter, drag marks through the mud toward the channel indicated he had been seized at the margin and pulled into the water in a rapid strike and drag sequence consistent with a large Nile crocodile. His camera bag was found on the bank. The tripod was still deployed. He was not recovered alive. Cause of death was confirmed as a fatal Nile crocodile attack. The section of channel was temporarily restricted pending survey. The guide was cleared of any breach of protocol. The tripod was still deployed at the bank edge. He had it set up, crouched down at the water's margin, and the animal had been there before he was. While the Okavango's channels had given back nothing until investigators arrived the following morning, the dry thorn bush outside Hwange was about to show that even in broad daylight, with clients close enough to watch, there is no time to act once the margin has already been spent. It was October 23, 2019, and October is the pressure point of the dry season in western Zimbabwe. For months, water holes shrank and grass withered. By October, elephants followed ancient routes to remaining water, dehydrated, stressed, and highly alert after enduring weeks of worsening drought and scarce resources. Licensed walking safari guides follow strict October protocols around herds. Stop, maintain distance, and never advance or redirect. The rules exist because calf season in dry October leaves almost no margin for error, something every experienced guide in the region understands. Tavanga Chahuri, 46, had spent nearly a decade working as a tracker for a licensed operator before leaving and establishing his own walking safari service. His operation was unlicensed and uninsured, marketed through informal tourism referral networks as offering the kind of access and proximity that the licensed circuit had become too careful to provide. He had been running it for 3 years before October 2019. 3 years of walks, hundreds of clients, no serious injuries. That record had become, in the way these things quietly do, both his selling point and his entire risk philosophy. 3 years without incident convinced him his judgment was enough, gradually replacing the safety framework he chose not to follow. On October 23rd, Tavanga was guiding 3 clients on foot through mixed woodland when they encountered a herd of approximately 20 elephants moving toward a waterhole. Several adult females with calves were visible at the herd's edge, a configuration that any licensed guide in the region would have recognized immediately as a stop-and-hold situation. Tavanga did not redirect the group. Based on client accounts gathered separately by investigators, he moved the party forward, closing to approximately 80 feet from the herd's near edge before stopping. 3 clients. There's something about that detail that sits with me. 3 people who had followed someone into the bush on foot with no idea that none of the safety infrastructure the license framework requires had been filed or arranged for their walk. The trust they extended was the entirety of their safety system. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth. Adult females weigh between 5,500 and 7,000 pounds and can reach 25 miles per hour in a full charge, faster than any person on foot can outrun flat ground. In encounters involving calves, particularly in the late dry season when stress levels across the herd are elevated, the behavioral threshold in adult females compresses significantly. With calves nearby, a mother elephant can charge instantly, covering 80 feet in about 3 seconds. One adult female at the herd's edge charged the group. The 3 clients scattered. Tsavo, positioned at the front and closest to the herd, was struck directly. Based on client accounts which investigators gathered separately and found broadly consistent, the elephant drove into him and carried him several feet before disengaging and returning toward the calves. That morning, no route plan had been filed and no proper emergency system was in place. The clients had to search for a signal, delaying help. By the time assistance arrived, Tsavo had lost consciousness and died before reaching the nearest clinic. The investigation confirmed his unlicensed status and found that a prior informal warning had been issued to his operation approximately 8 months before the incident without formal follow-through. He hadn't filed a route plan. Nobody knew where he was taking those 3 clients that morning. When it went wrong, the people who survived had to walk out on foot before they could even make contact with anyone. He bypassed every safeguard and approached a vulnerable calf herd. While Zimbabwe's dry scrub had delivered its consequence in plain view of witnesses who could do nothing but run, the buffer zone, scrubland along Kruger National Park's western boundary, was about to show how quickly a career built around getting close runs out of distance to work with. It was January 9, 2016, and the Mopane and Thornveld terrain along the border of Kruger National Park's western boundary does not look, in the early dark before sunrise, like the kind of landscape that demands precision. The dirt tracks that run parallel to the park's fence lines are used by rangers, maintenance vehicles, and the occasional researcher. In dry January, the grass along those tracks has been grazed short, and the sightlines into the scrubland are long and open. That openness creates an impression that what is visible is what is present. It is an impression specific to daylight and to eye level. At ground level, before first light, in the sections of low drainage bush that line the track margins, it describes almost none of what is actually there. Near Kruger's western boundary, private reserves and buffer zones have documented signed access points recorded in corridor records. The Leopard movement, logged through camera traps and ranger observation in those buffer zones, is dense and specific. Particular gullies, particular sections of drainage bush, particular time windows when large males use the terrain to transit between the park boundary and surrounding scrubland. Officials issues active advisories about those corridors, and the dawn and dusk windows are flagged explicitly as periods of peak predator activity. The people who operate near those boundaries regularly understand exactly what the advisory represents. Pranavesh Kulkarni, 52, was a semi-retired civil engineer from Pune who had developed a serious wildlife photography practice over the previous decade. He had attended photographic safaris at several of the private lodges along Kruger's western boundary and had used those visits to build detailed knowledge of the terrain adjacent to the park terrain he began returning to, independently, outside of organized safari structures, to access positions no lodge vehicle would take him to. He was published in regional nature publications, maintained a following online, and had developed a reputation within wildlife photography circles for images that required proximity and positioning that other photographers chose not to attempt. Close proximity was the feature that defined his work. In the 18 months before January 2016, he was warned twice about entering restricted areas during prohibited hours. Both warnings were informal, and both times he returned safely without consequences. He'd been warned twice, returned fines both times, and I think that is the most dangerous thing that happened to him in those 18 months. Not the Leopard, those 2 unpenalized crossings, each one quietly confirming to him that the boundary didn't lead where the signage said it would. On January 14th, before sunrise, Pranavesh entered a section of buffer zone terrain approximately 200 feet past the marked access boundary, alone, on foot, carrying full camera gear. His vehicle was found at a pull-off near the boundary marker. He had not communicated his specific location to anyone that morning. Dawn hours, alone, past the line. In terrain that authorities own camera trap records identified as active Leopard corridor at exactly that time of day. Leopards are ambush predators that rely on staying completely hidden. In dense bush, one can approach within feet unnoticed. They give no warning before attacking. The attack itself is often the first sign, delivered suddenly with speed, precision, and overwhelming force. A ranger on a routine boundary patrol the following morning found Pranavesh's camera bag, tripod, and a lens filter approximately 300 feet inside the restricted boundary. The tripod had been deployed. Ground disturbance consistent with a strike, drag marks leading into the drainage bush, and leopard spoor confirmed and documented by wildlife officials indicated a strike and drag sequence originating at the camera equipment position. His body was located approximately 180 feet from the camera bag. The investigation confirmed the cause of death and documented the access violation in full. The case received significant media attention given his public profile within South Africa's wildlife photography community. Officials issued a formal communication reinforcing buffer boundary protocols and announced increased patrol density in active leopard corridor sections along Kruger's western boundary. The tripod was set up. He crouched before sunrise, more than 200 feet past the boundary, in an area known for leopard activity at that hour. He had crossed that line before, without consequence. But each successful crossing reduced the margin for error, and this time there was none left. While Kruger's western buffer had given back nothing until the following morning's patrol, the thorn bush on the fringes of Kenya's Tsavo West National Park was about to show that the most organized and deliberate illegal operation still fails the moment its most critical calculation turns out to be wrong. It was May 7, 2021, and the scrubland on the fringes of Tsavo West National Park does not advertise itself as a place where routine safari drives can suddenly become fatal. The terrain rolls in low, thorny, undulation, acacia, and comifera bush, interspersed with seasonal luggas that run dry by May. And from the surface, it presents no visible boundary between the reserve's protected interior and the communal land. Buffer that surrounds it. Wildlife viewing vehicles regularly travel the area's network of dirt tracks during the dry season, when lion prides range widely beyond the park's formal boundary. Darpan Bosley, 39, was part of a guided safari group operating in the Tsavo buffer region. He was not a first-time visitor to African wildlife areas and had developed a confidence around large animals that exceeded his actual understanding of their behavior. Like many people who spend time around predators without incident, his previous experiences had become his risk model. He had been close to dangerous animals before, and nothing had gone wrong. Each successful encounter quietly reduced the caution he carried into the next one, including May 7th. Earlier that afternoon, the safari group had located a male lion, a large adult from a pride that ranged the Tsavo buffer, resting in open thorn bush, approximately 6 kilometers from the reserve boundary. Witness statements later indicated that the lion appeared calm and largely inactive. The vehicle stopped at a safe viewing distance. Guides instructed passengers to remain inside the vehicle following standard safari safety procedures. What I keep returning to is that other people were nearby and witnessed what happened, yet nothing altered the outcome. Whether because of distance or speed, the event unfolded faster than anyone present could effectively respond. African lions are among Africa's most capable predators. Adult males in East Africa weigh between 350 to 420 pounds and can close 30 feet in under 2 seconds. A lion resting in cover is not necessarily relaxed, asleep, or tolerant of a person approaching on foot. Safari vehicles function as a protective barrier that lions have learned to tolerate. A solitary human on foot is something entirely different. Once that barrier disappears, the animal's response can change immediately. The vehicle was supposed to be the safety system. What came next was a decision. Investigators concluded that Darpan exited the vehicle despite warnings and began approaching the lion to obtain a closer view and photographs. At close range, the lion launched a defensive charge, striking his neck and upper body. Other members of the safari party were too distant to intervene before the attack was over. Emergency assistance was requested immediately, but Darpan succumbed to injuries consistent with a lion attack. Wildlife authorities reviewed witness accounts, vehicle positioning, and physical evidence at the scene. The findings indicated that the lion's behavior was consistent with a defensive response to a person entering its comfort zone on foot. No evidence suggested the lion had actively stalked or pursued the safari group prior to the incident. The vehicle was the protection. Instead of remaining inside it, he approached the animal to get closer. That decision was the last one he made. While Tsavo's thorn bush had offered its evidence only to investigators arriving the following morning, the lower Zambezi River in Zimbabwe was about to deliver the final story in this episode, one that happened in front of witnesses with every safety system functioning exactly as designed, right up until the moment someone reached past it. It was July 31st, 2018, and guided canoe safaris on the lower Zambezi River operate within one of the most precisely defined safety frameworks in African safari tourism. The protocols exist because the Zambezi in July, low water, concentrated wildlife, hippopods holding tight to deep channels and oxbow pools, Nile crocodiles lining every sun-warmed bank presents a combination of variables that experienced operators have mapped across decades of incidents and near misses. The rules are not suggestions. No paddle strikes on the water surface, no trailing of hands or arms over the canoe's sides, and above all, no extension of any body part beyond the gunwale during crocodile and hippo encounters. Those rules are explained in full before departure, enforced throughout the float, and built from the understanding that the canoe is the only structure between the people in it and animals that operate in that river, without awareness of any distinction between the vessel's occupants and anything else in their environment. The canoe is not a comfort measure. It is the entire structure that makes the activity survivable. Calder Rensen, 29, was a Dutch national on a multi-day safari itinerary that included a 2-day guided canoe section on the lower Zambezi. His 2 travel companions, interviewed separately by investigators after the incident, described a consistent pattern in how Calder approached structured activities, compressed pre-activity safety checks, extended actions past agreed limits, a systematic tendency to move toward the boundary of whatever framework he was operating inside. None of those prior instances on the trip had resulted in serious injury. That history was, to Calder, evidence that his read of situations was reliable. What it documented was a consistent practice of consuming the safety margin built into systems designed to tolerate minor boundary pushing and then applying that same approach to a situation with no margin at all. Before launching on the morning of the second canoe day, Calder had asked the lead guide about the possibility of partially extending himself over the gunwale to get a lower camera angle during wildlife encounters, putting his upper body and arms past the canoe's edge for what he described as better visual access. The guide declined clearly. No body part past the gunwale, no exceptions, no modifications to the protocol. Calder appeared to accept this. The canoes launched. The detail I cannot move past is that the other 2 people pulled back when told. Same river, same moment. Calder chose differently. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most dangerous predators. Large adults can exceed 15 feet and 1,000 pounds. They detect movement and vibrations with remarkable sensitivity. In river safari conditions, a person extending beyond a canoe can create a new target. Crocodiles give virtually no warning. The attack is often the first sign they were there. Footage reviewed by investigators from a guide's camera in the lead canoe, together with statements from both companions in Calder's vessel, documented that during a close pass along a section of bank where a large Nile crocodile had been observed basking, Calder extended his upper body and both arms past the gunwale toward the water's surface. Both companions pulled back and remained inside the frame. Calder did not retract. The crocodile struck from the bank, grabbing his arm and shoulder and partially pulling him from the canoe. Guides launched an emergency evacuation within minutes, but his injuries were critical. He was flown toward Harare for treatment and died before reaching the hospital. The subsequent investigation found the licensed operator in full compliance with all required protocols prior to the incident. The guide's pre-launch safety briefing was found thorough and documented. The operator was not found to bear responsibility for the outcome. Additional reinforced protocols for activity near the gunwale were implemented following the inquiry. The safety system worked exactly as it was designed to. What failed was his decision to push past its limits. Faced with danger, he reached outside his only protection. If you liked today's episode, go ahead and hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe. What are you waiting for? We'll see you next time.